Hello, I'm Professor Lieu, here with art prof teaching artist Lauren Welch. Welcome to our video where we critique your artwork. We've got two pieces to talk about today. We have this oil and acrylic painting by Ramonn Vieitez. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. And we also have this furniture design piece, which is created with recycled rock climbing rope in HDF by artist Mark Heffley. If you would like to grow as an artist, or if you're like everybody in the US who is in lockdown right now and you're stuck indoors, we've got everything that you need here at Art Prof, tutorials and critiques. All right, before we get started though, I want to tell all of you that we do have this new page on artprof.org. It's on the menu bar. It's a complete guide to teaching and learning art online. We've got resources for teachers who are trying to transition to a remote classroom. We've got a whole page of art prompts for those of you who need a little push to get started with your assignments. And we also have this new page that I just threw up today about home art supplies. Supplies that you can get from any average household and with very little expense. So I'm hoping that this area is going to help you guys during this strange time that we are experiencing right now. Yes, Lahona, it's live, the home art supplies. And thank you for joining us, 10,000 Crows, Yovel, Salty Person, and Pennington Arts. Okay, we are to start with Mark Heffley's design. And Lauren, before we get into Mark's process, I just want to hear your first take on this piece without knowing anything about Mark's background or their process.
Oh, I just thought it was so fascinating. It was like, I don't think here at Art Prof, let's see what we've been doing Art Prof for 5 years.
Well, we've only been live for 3 though.
Well, right, but in all that time, I don't think we've seen a single furniture design piece yet. So I was just super thrilled to see this type of artwork. And any of you that do make, things that aren't just like, paintings or your traditional art mediums, please submit. This is like really cool when we get this kind of stuff. But anyways, what I immediately thought of, oh crap, hang on. I'm getting a little feedback here on my YouTube live. Okay, so yeah, there's this show that I listen to called Magnus Archives, and there's a table in it that is so mesmerizing with its articulate patterns that kind of like, there's patterns upon patterns upon patterns, that it will suck you into the table. And that's how I felt looking at this table here. There's so many details. It's very, the word is like labyrinthine, I think. And I just could look at it forever and find something new to look at within those patterns.
Definitely. I mean, I find myself really mesmerized by the repetition of the patterning. I think is beautifully done. And I think the color is pretty cohesive. I mean, there definitely is that one area underneath the glass where you get a few more warmish colors, although the vast majority of it does seem to be largely this bluish tone. But I'm really surprised that the colors, I think, work, because in theory they are quite different from each other, and yet
Yeah.
somehow I do find it to be quite congruent. What's your take on the color scheme?
I think the color scheme is really interesting. When I was reading this artist statement, I was really interested in the process. So all of these colors here are from found rock climbing ropes. And these rock climbing ropes, they come in these, I'm going to call them kind of tacky colors, like the bright pink, the neon green, and I can't say this for certain because I'm not a rock climber, but there's a certain, I feel like a safety feature to that. Like you want to be able to see the rope that you're using. You don't want some like natural blending color. But so I am really impressed that this artist is taking these like tacky colors and turning it into a very mature color scheme. And I think part of that is just in the pairing of the colors, the patterns, and also in the design work. It reminds me a lot of, for instance, the geometry that you see in a mosque, or in some of those really built out mosques that we've shown in previous streams as like art history examples, or it also reminds me of tapestries, like some really beautiful Persian rug type tapestries.
Speaking of floor patterns, we've got you guys covered for that because I pulled some of these slides. For example, this is a floor pattern of actually a labyrinth from Chartres Cathedral in France. And Mark, I don't know if you're watching live right now, but if you have not taken a look at some of these floor patterns, I definitely would, because some of them have really similar types of shapes that are definitely present in Mark's piece rather. And then this one especially, which is in France. I mean, it's cool that you mentioned mosques, but for me, the first thing I thought about was definitely those Gothic cathedrals in France. And a lot of them do have that rigid geometric pattern
Oh
that we're
yeah,
seeing
definitely.
in
Yeah,
Mark's piece.
I
Joe
totally agree.
Taro is saying, I know it's a bad thing that COVID-19 exists, but now I'm quarantined at home. I can finally binge watch your videos.
Yeah.
Silver lining. I mean, I think all of us who are in lockdown right now, we're trying to find the positive side of being trapped in our home. So if that's what we can do with our time, I think that's a good thing, sort of.
Yeah, I agree with that. Art prof's kind of like the light in my world right now. I feel like it's the one area where we kind of have things put together.
Let's see. Mac M is saying, isn't this just cut up paracord rock climbing ropes? Yep. And Lahona saying, it reminds me of something antique and Asian. Salty Person is saying, as an Asian person can confirm, it looks like a spin on traditional stuff. Okay, well, let's take another look at it. Let's look at the full view so you guys can really see what the entire piece looks like. Lauren, what do you think about the glass top? Because that's the only part of the table that is not made of the rock climbing rope. Do you think that that's working as an integration with two very different materials?
It's hard for me to say. The functional logistical side of me is like, oh yes, this definitely makes sense. Now it has both a form and a function. I would hate to put like a coffee cup on this if it didn't have glass, if it was all made out of the cord. At the same time, it does feel a little bit incongruous. Like it's all of the materials here, they're not organic. I know it's nylon, but it has this more matte texture, and then suddenly you have this really flat, glossy surface that's doing a totally different thing. So I really have to sit and think about it. I'm not sure. It does give me pause. What about you?
Well, oh, we've got Mark in the chat. That's terrific. Good. So, Mark, we can pick your
Yeah.
brain during this critique. We love it when the artist is watching live because then it becomes a lot more like a conversation. Well, I'll tell you, I don't mind the glass. I think from a functional point of view, I understand it, but it's not something that I think is that visible. It's not like it's a sheet of wood that's on
Right.
top. And so for me, it works for that reason. I think the part of the table that I don't think is working as well with the other sections is the lower flat section of the table, because the top section that's right underneath the glass, that to me looks a lot like those patterns that you see on Greek pottery vases. I really enjoy that
Hmm.
pattern, and I think the integration of the red and the green, it's working really well as a contrast. But there's something about the connection between the legs and the lower shelf area that they just look stuck together. Like I wish form wise that they had a stronger connection.
I
And I don't know functionally what needs to happen to get those legs to attach to that shelf, but I just feel like it's two things thrown together. Whereas the legs that are underneath the top part of the table, you don't see the connection, so it's not really an issue.
Yeah, so are you talking about the area where that lower level, it looks like the corners are like chopped off?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. I feel now that you say that, I think I do agree with you there. Although I do appreciate the using a simpler approach, not having it be like another pattern for that bottom layer. I think that gives us some kind of breathing room for the overall design, like because you have all these patterns everywhere else that are like kind of crazy. Oh, and I love that close up view too. Um, but yeah, I guess that could be like a limitation as far as like I want to know how these materials are put together, like how they're stuck together. How do you adhere a leg to the top of the table versus like the side of the table? Is there any way to weave them together in some way, create some kind of knot system that secures them like around, you know, how like a tree like can grow around things?
Yeah, so Mark, if you could tell us in the chat, what is the process for joining the leg to that lower shelf? I'm curious too, because when I look at the image, I can't tell. I mean, sometimes you look at these designs and it's like really obvious that they had to do this to make it attach, and just from a design point of view, it doesn't look great. I think in your case, you're not revealing how they're attached. But to me, I don't know. I wonder if it's actually the size of the lower shelf in relation to the top shelf, because if we go back to this view where you can see everything, I wonder if it's just you need to establish the hierarchy between making the top part of the table feel dominant, and that could happen in scale, could happen in terms of color. But I just feel like the lower shelf, it just feels a little bit clunky compared to the other sections, because these table legs are beautiful. I
Yeah, those
mean,
table
they're
legs really.
so solid, and the technique is absolutely impeccable. In fact, I don't know, for those of you who have been to the Vatican, there's this beautiful canopy that's in the center of St. Peter's Basilica. And Mark, this is exactly what I thought of the second I saw your table. I know it's not quite the same type of shape, but that similar twist that's going up the column to me was very reminiscent of this canopy. I think it's called the Baldacchino or something in Italian, but I loved seeing that connection between those things. Let's
Yeah.
see. Lunja saying if there are more layers under the top and forms a pyramid, the see-through would work even better. And Derek is saying a wooden surface wouldn't show the detail of the top without maybe resin. And Mihir is saying if the lower shelf is wider, then it can attach to the legs as well. And Mark is explaining he uses different glues and welding, and there are new ways to do it. Well, Mark, I mean, I have to say, in terms of your technical execution, this is immaculate. What do you think, Lauren, about the technique?
Oh, I think it's beautiful. I think also I just want to mention one of the first things I noticed was not just the table, but how this is photographed. I love these photographs. I think this is great documentation. And if you want to share your tips with the rest of us here in the chat, like that would be great. Like I'm really able to focus on these details and like how well it's been made. I can focus on all of those little patterns. I just think that execution wise, I don't see like any problems. Like I agree with you. It's mostly in that design itself. Nothing like technique wise though is really giving me any issue.
Well, and I have to say, 9 times out of 10, when people submit 3D artwork to us, there's always something in the photo that I end up commenting on during the critique. And Mark, you're like the first person
I
ever
know these are so
who
pro.
I'm going to say, yes, these look really professional. They really let me understand the piece extremely well. So you've done a really nice job of presenting yourself, because 3D artwork is very problematic for a lot of artists. They really have trouble presenting it with a lot of accuracy. So I'm really happy about
Um,
that.
while we were talking about this, I just had an artist that I really, really, really wanted Mark to look up. His name is Shahir Zazai. He's a Toronto-based Afghan Canadian artist, and he makes they're like, he makes rugs in MS Paint. It's hard for me to explain. They're like very, very detailed. The aesthetic of them is like very similar to what you're doing with this, with these legs of this table here, where you've got like this twisting and turning, but there's also this geometry that's a part of it. So I will link it later in the chat, but yeah.
Let's see. Mark is saying hire professional. Photo credit to Charles. Lost at this moment. I mean, if you can afford a professional photographer for 3D artwork, you should, because I didn't think it made that big of a difference until I actually watched a professional photographer photograph a 3D sculpture, and my mind was just blown. Like, I could
Yeah.
not believe how good the work looked. It was
Yeah.
completely transformed. I mean, it still looked like the sculpture. It's not like they misrepresented it, but yeah, I mean, it's really incredible how good the work looks if you can hire a professional. That said, though, we do have a page on artprof.org that does show you a more economical way to photograph 3D work, because it does get very expensive after a little while. But let's
Yeah.
go back to the lower shelf, because
Yeah.
one thing that I was thinking is I wonder if it's not just the size, but actually the patterning. Because one thing I'm noticing, Mark, about the pattern in the lower shelf is that there's this like red and green shape in the middle. It's almost like a trapezoid. And then there's this like border of blue around it. And I think one of the things that I really like about the top pattern, the one on the top of the table, is that everything keeps weaving in and out, and there's a lot of movement, and I don't feel that the pattern ever stops. Whereas I feel like those two areas of color in the lower shelf, they feel really separate. Like they don't ever enter each other's space. They're pretty high in
Well,
contrast. And so, Mark, I don't know if this is possible technically, but I wonder if you might just play around with switching out that lower shelf, because to me, that's really the section that sticks out a little bit too much. The rest of it, I think,
I
balances
don't
really beautifully.
I don't think that taking it out would make it better or like more firm. I do think that that lower shelf plays like a very important role as to like how we see this, especially that what do you call it, like the 3/4 kind of bird's eye view angle that we have, where you're looking down into the shelf and see the legs peeking out. I think like that mirroring of the top shelf is really important to the uh, how the overall what's the word, like repetition in the piece, the overall design like matches up with the or like speaks to the design repetition like within the chords itself, or like the way the chords are alternated, and then within the chords, because the chords are made up of a little patterning like in and of themselves, so you have like this recursiveness going on that I think is really important. And if you take out that bottom layer there, suddenly you're kind of missing that, and then it becomes all aesthetic and not related to the form anymore.
All right, Ramonn is actually bringing up in the chat what I wanted to ask you next, Lauren, is what is the blue material in the middle on the
That
lower shelf? And Mark,
that is
maybe you
the
can
HDF.
answer that, but I was actually looking at the above you, and to be honest, I didn't really notice that blue section for some reason, because it's so different. I mean, I'm guessing it's not the same material as the
Mark
rest of
says
the
it's
table, but do you
HDF.
like that blue section, Lauren?
He says it's painted HDF.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that the texture of it is like kind of again, it's like this weird thing that I'm having with the glass too, where the change in texture is like very abrupt and different to me, and I don't know how I'm sitting with that yet. Mostly right now I'm just like very aware of the change, but I can't decide if that is like necessarily like good or bad yet. I think having that blue piece and then the glass, like having the two exist in the same piece is an important balancing factor, at least for each other. I think if it was just like if that HDF was not there, but the glass was there, or like vice versa, I would be like, nope, that's gotta go. But I feel like having the two here means that there's like more conscious decision as far as like alternating materials.
I
Yeah.
mean, for me, I don't like the HDF very much. I feel like it's really out of place. It feels like a sore thumb. It's blue, but the surface of it looks so different. It's very painterly, actually, because the geometry of the patterning with the rock climbing rope is so bold and rigid that then we get to this really flowy section of color, and to me, it doesn't work. If it were up to me, I would get rid of the HDF and either get rid of the lower shelf or replace it with a lower shelf that maybe is a little bit less visible. So I think the thing is, Mark, you've got a lot of really beautiful components, but really it's a matter of balancing them against each other. So you say to yourself, what is the glass like compared to the HDF? What is the lower shelf look like compared to the top shelf? Because the individual components are all beautiful. The HDF has a lovely texture. I'm just questioning its place in the context of this overall design.
I like Mac's comment here, suggestion. Would it work better if the glass was acrylic, all modern materials in an ancient style?
I mean, it depends. I feel like there's so many versions of acrylic, you'd have to get specific about that. And Mark is saying it was to solve a problem with the planter and plant on it. You can't see it. I too dislike that section. Oh, I see what you're saying. So ultimately, it can have a plant in the middle. And okay, in which case you don't see the HDF. I don't know if I like it as a plant holder. I don't know. I mean, this could just be my personal aesthetic that I just really enjoy furniture that's a little bit more minimal. I feel like when it starts to get really complicated and bulky, I don't tend to like it so much, but that could just be my personal taste. I don't know. What do you think about the
That's
plant, Lauren?
I really liked the plant inside actually, especially because the planter itself looks like it's made out of a similar material. And that actually gets to a point that I want to talk a little bit about where it's like why these materials are chosen. It sounds like Mark has really done a lot of rock climbing, so this comes from a like rock climbing interest, but then like based on his artist statement then transitions more into like a sustainability thing, like, oh, how can we upcycle, how can we reuse these materials? So I guess I am interested in how these weird material choices, like how each of them like fits into this larger, I'm gonna call it a larger vision that Mark has as an artist. So every time I see something like, oh hey, like the plant is also in this kind of material. Oh, like maybe there's a rug that goes with it that's also this material. Then the material choices or like the way these things look like build in strength for me. So I think maybe this issue with like, this HDF board or like say the glass or whatever is because it seems like not necessarily consistent with like the larger set of like decisions, both visual and ethical being made.
Lunja is saying about the rocks, maybe a woven vase with some crystals or rocks would sound really nice too. I mean, for me, Lauren, I'm going to disagree with you about the planter. I think the thing about the planter, I like the idea of it. I just feel like it's so bulky and heavy. And one thing I really appreciate about sculpture and furniture is negative space. For example, if you think about that chair that
Oh, you're
Marcel
so
Breuer is so
traditional.
popular for, I just love the negative space in that. And the planter for me sort of ruins that negative space. I feel like I can't navigate through that as much.
I feel like you're very into an aesthetic that is big in the 20th century that now pervades the rest of our existence through IKEA and other pop furniture.
Probably, but then I would say, as a counterpoint to what you're saying, if you're going to work against that, really work against it. I
That's
mean,
true.
go
That's
over
so
the
true.
top. I mean, build it up like crazy. A lot of it's taste, but that's my first impression.
Yeah, I'm really a more is more person. So while Clara is like arguing to edit, it sounds like edit is what you're going for. I'm saying like put too much. There needs to be more things. I want to see like not just this. I want to see the whole rest of the space also with these things going on. I want 100 planters that are like this, that are on top of the table too.
By
Yeah.
the way, if you guys would like to have your work critiqued here on YouTube, you can submit your work. Just go to artprof.org and click on critiques. Okay, we're going to move on to the second piece, which is by Ramonn Vieitez. I'm really sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, but this piece is done in oil and acrylic. And Lauryn, there's a whole story behind this piece, but let me hear what your first impression is without us actually getting into Ramonn's artist statement, which, if you want to preview, is in the video description below.
Yeah, these artist statements are really rich this time, guys. So please read through them. They help with the artwork a lot. So when I first saw this piece, my immediate thought is like, oh my God, the number of different hats this painter is wearing right now. So this is an oil painting, right? And there are like so many
Oil and
languages.
acrylic.
Oil and oil and acrylic. I'm sorry. There are so many languages being spoken in this painting, both textual language, but then also like painting languages. This artist is basically trying to be 100 different artists in the number of graffiti tags going on here. And then there's also this figuration going on that's very uh, more referential or more true to life than these like painterly graffiti tags. And then you have this brick, this crazy intense painted brick that's like very patterned. So I just feel like this is a visual playground to look around. There's a huge amount of narrative going on that I want to know more about. It takes me time to look at and parse things out.
By the way, Lauryn, Ramonn is with us live in the chat, which
I'm
I'm very happy about. So, Ramonn, we probably are going to be picking your brain for a couple things. But for
yeah.
now, let's just talk about our first impressions of the piece. I mean, to me, one of the things I really like about this piece is it's just packed with content. I
Yeah.
mean, I feel like I could look at this piece for 15 minutes and still be discovering things that I did not see earlier. And so I really appreciate that about this piece. But then you start to say to yourself, well, hang on a second, is that actually a good thing or is it actually hurting your piece? Are we losing the sense of focus? So here's the thing, the way I approached looking at the piece was, to me, the one moment of focus or clarity, however you want to think about it, it's the figure. Because the graffiti is everywhere. There's all these surfaces of the buildings and all these textures, and I'm definitely going to dive into that at some point. But the figure is the one moment where there is a story that really starts to emerge that's an actual action. I'm sure there are stories embedded in all the graffiti, but the figure is actually going somewhere. And so the first thing I said to myself was, who is this person? How old are they? I'm not
Yeah.
sure. Maybe it's a
Yeah.
teenager? I don't know. How old do you think the person is?
I thought they were a child. I felt like it was very ambiguous. And my thought was, okay, what is this child or very small person doing here in this area that looks, fairly run down, given like the broken glass and the bits of detritus around and all the graffiti. Are they talking to someone? Is this like a not a clandestine meeting, but something that needs to be like kept like under wraps? Like, is this a rebellion of some sort? Like the fact that we can't really see their face, I think, is really important to me. Yeah.
Also, is that blood on the back of their shirt. I can't tell if that's
Yeah.
maybe they went through the window and they got cut up by the broken glass. It's a
I
little
can't
bit
tell.
unclear.
I'm not sure. I thought it was a logo on the back of the shirt. Um, but it's also like even though that there's such a strange thing going on with this figure because okay, so most of this painting here is I feel like it's text. Like our brains want to read all this text. There's so much text and that's like a different type of I've mentioned this in previous YouTube streams where that is a different part of your brain that reads text than that reads images. And so you have all this one type of reading there, and then this figure is both camouflaged, but then also really pops out because it's the one area where you're reading images, you're not reading text anymore. So you have this crazy thing going on where they are hidden, but they're also like really in a in plain sight, like it's really glaring. So I'm interested in this camouflaging type event that's going on. Like what is this person signaling by being here?
Lahona is saying this is such a rich piece. It reminds me of walking down Portage in Maine in Winnipeg. And 10,000 Crows is saying, Ramonn, this is a very nice, interesting work. For sure. I mean, I think because there is so much text for me, the first thing I say to myself is, what is the text that I look at first? And
Yeah.
generally speaking, that's usually whatever text is the most readable. And for me, the first one I see is at the top, that's above the figure with the red shirt, where it
Yep.
says Gay
Me too.
Riot. So I see
Me
that
too.
first. And then I would say I probably jump to Queer Riot at the bottom.
Yeah.
And then I think the red underneath the figure says hate. I could be wrong. I'm maybe looking at that not in the best size. Let me see if I can see that. HA, I don't know. It could be art. It's a little bit hard to see.
Yeah.
But then I start thinking, okay, Queer Riot. The first thing that I think about is, okay, Stonewall, the event that happened, the Stonewall riots in New York City. And then I start saying to myself, well, hang on, is this New York City? Is this a different city? And then I start
Yeah.
thinking about culture and time period. And so I'm curious, those of you in the chat, do you place this in a certain city or a certain country or a certain time period? Because the kids' clothing, it's not from the colonial era or anything like that, but it could be the 70s. It does
Yeah, I
not
was
have to
thinking
be
the
today.
70s. Yeah, I also wonder a lot about that because I wasn't placing it in any of these places like Lahona's saying Winnipeg. I was thinking I haven't even been to Berlin, but I was thinking of like, you know, how the Berlin Wall's covered or was covered in graffiti. And a lot of that was really it was very political. And so I'm thinking, and yeah, there was like Stonewall. So we're also again thinking of these like really people that are extremely oppressed, like rising up and saying like, oh, I really don't like I want to be treated like a human being. And so when I see this graffiti, it's not even like what I almost feel like what I'm reading, like, okay, I'm reading Gay Riot, but like I don't even necessarily feel like that needs to be written like 5 million times because if you zoom in, like you can actually like find it everywhere. Like just having the one is almost like enough to signal it because the aesthetic itself then leads the rest of the way in, at least for me.
Mac is saying could be interpreted as an adolescent, quote, peeking into their own budding adulthood, future sexuality, maybe in relation to some of the graffiti text. And Lahone is saying, yes, could be 70s, maybe Berlin. And Ramonn is saying it's a 90s Japanese anime character on the shirt. Oh, okay, so I guess I was wrong. It's not blood. But you might want to be careful about that just because the broken window there and because they're burying their head in it could be something like that. Lahone is saying, I love that patch on the shirt, a logo, blood, or shadow. Perfect ambiguity. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, maybe it could be waffling between the two, and maybe that's working.
Yeah.
And Derek is saying, I've never even been to Thailand, but I feel like this is Take Me There. And Lunja wants to know, what about the Daitadura Nunca Mace? Oh, I
Oh,
think
oh
that's at the
yeah,
top,
that's
isn't it?
yeah, because I only speak English and I know that that's terrible, but I would love some help knowing what that says.
Yeah, Ramonn, if you can jump in there and let us know, because that was the other
Yeah, that
piece
was
of
the big
text that I could
mystery.
identify, but I don't speak, is it Spanish? I don't know. But yeah, I'd love to hear what
It's
that's
so
all about.
embarrassing. Yeah, also the other part that is kind of intriguing for me is the way that the gay riot now part is like cut off on that brick, because that brick is really clear except for that text that's like very sharply written, and it's like kind of weird that it's cut off. I mean, like I know that that's like a perspectival thing, but that is like a place where my eye like constantly gets caught on because it's the only thing that's right there.
Let's go down and read a little bit from Ramon's artist statement to give you guys some ideas. And of course, Ramonn, feel free to jump in and let us know about that. They
Dictatorship never again.
say, my work is articulated in the male figure, represented by young characters and stage portraits, relationship underpinned by an imaginary universe, merges through themes that influences you, like melancholy, pop culture, horror history, graffiti, but the main influence comes from the movement in queer aesthetics, which dialogue with religious elements and symbols, thus developing their narrative. Oh, wow, that is a lot
That's a
for
lot of
a
information.
single artist statement. I'm just trying to
Yeah.
process everything that was in that sentence. Any thoughts, Lauren, about that statement?
I think that there are so one, because I'm really dumb, I'm gonna say I'm like a really dumb person when it comes to artist statements. Um I think that there's a lot of really interesting big topics there. One thing that would help me is to have examples of specifics, not necessarily like specific paintings or anything, but if you're working with like religious iconography or with queer aesthetics, listing a specific in your art that you are interested in, like what are you trying to queer? Is it the graffiti that is the queering element for you? Is it the is it like particular environments? Having something like that, like I'm gonna say a noun that we can anchor ourselves in, can be really helpful for the artist reading your statement and then looking at the work to really make that connection.
Oh, Ramon is saying in the chat, it says dictatorship never again. And yes, it's in Portuguese. Okay. Um, I'm going to say that I agree with Lauren that I think it's great that you're tackling really heavy subject matter, but you got to whittle it down because once you put the words gay riot and dictatorship, it's like, oh my gosh, like where are we going with this? And so, one thing that I say to my students is that specificity tends to be a very powerful way of communicating things. And if you try to fit everything into a single image, it ends up being very watered down. And usually, somebody talking about a specific experience can actually be more powerful as
Yeah.
opposed to saying, let's talk about the entire World War II. Like, if you try to address everything in World War II in a single painting, it's a losing situation. And so I wonder, Ramonn, if there's a certain one area of those topics that you mentioned that you can focus on more, because just queer riot enough is that will keep you busy for like 50 years. Like you
Yeah.
could just do gay riot and that would be so much for you to sink your teeth into. So
It's
I
like
would recommend that you try to whittle it down a little bit more in terms of your subject matter. I have to say though, there's some really amazing formal things going on in this piece. Kudos to you for your linear perspective. I feel like I'm
yeah.
the linear perspective police. Like in all my drawing classes, I'm just on everybody. You didn't do the linear perspective. It's all wrong. Yours, I think, is pretty solid. And I also just love the attention to surface texture, like the brick texture, the sidewalk texture. And I am loving your balance of saturated and muted colors. Lauren, you're the color queen. Give
Oh
us your
yeah.
take.
I was gonna say on this piece, like usually when people mix like straight up grays, I'm like, nah, nah, like grays are really hard to do. Here I feel like they are so loved. Like as you said, every surface here has been given really wonderful attention. I look at how the sidewalk surface, the sidewalk gray, is has such a different character from the cement wall gray, which has a different character from the window the really musty, misty looking window, like that has a different gray. And it's not like they are chromatically different. Like that's not, but the way that they're mixed is very different. I think that's like really hard to do. So I am just like loving it. I love like when you zoom into some of these detail shots, seeing how the brushwork is being used to really manipulate those different or those contrasts that I'm talking about.
And you really can feel the layering of the graffiti. Like if you look at this one detail a little bit over to the left of the figure, there's this like pink and blues and very small detailed graffiti, but it's like you can see the different layers of that you've got really incredible painting technique, Ramonn. I mean, I just really admire so much what you've been able to accomplish because graffiti is not easy to paint. It's not predictable. There's so many different surfaces, and I think creating that in a convincing way is very challenging. Ramonn is saying in Brazil, we experience a coup and growing repression against the LGBTQ community. These things reflect strongly in my work. Okay, well, then in that case, I would say it would be good to contextualize the city so that we know that it's in Brazil, a specific Brazilian city, because the second you take it out of a particular country, you lose specificity. Because then we say, oh, this could be New York or it could be whatever.
I have something to say about that, or just a question for Ramonn. Do you face I do. Do you face like censorship down there? Like, is that a danger to make this specific? I know like my dad who participates in mail art, talking with people from I don't know, like different areas in South America, Venezuela, where there's been a lot of unrest. Like I can't say specific things because you can get in a whole lot of trouble. So I wonder how that is also affecting the artist statement, if that's something you're thinking about.
I mean, Ramonn, to me, the fact that you're making this work is really important. I think that people have to see these images, and art can be extremely powerful as far as really getting people to be more aware. I mean, I don't know a lot about Brazil and the politics of that or anything, but I feel like just critiquing your artwork for the short period of time, you've made my world bigger, and I feel like I know a little something about Brazil that I never knew before, and that's really significant. Let's see, Lunja is saying it might be about the political conservativeness in the difficult economic time that people regress. And Julia is saying, reminds me of the movie The Florida Project, in that you don't see the gravity of a situation until you see it through the eyes of a kid. That is really incredible, Julia. Wow, I love your comments so much.
I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, I'm going to have to look up that movie because I've never actually heard of that film before. But Ramonn, I have to say, I'm totally blown away that you're self-taught because
I know this is so much for this is like very high level, mature kind of work.
I mean, the one thing I would shift about this piece in terms of your technique, I wish that the wall on the right-hand side came forward more and that the wall on the back, which is on the left, pushed back. And I think the thing that's going to change that for you is if you can somehow introduce a sense of lighting into the scene, because if I try to figure out the lighting, I don't really know if it's early morning or if it's that like bright afternoon sunshine. I think if you can start to think about how light enters a space and affects the planes of the walls, then you're going to have something incredibly powerful. Because to me, that area where the two walls come together, I can't tell which one's coming forward and which one's pushing back. So if you can articulate that space a little bit better, I think that will really be a wonderful asset for your painting. I hope you guys will take the time to explore artprof.org, which is a free site. It's our home base. Lots of stuff on there that you won't get on YouTube. And we hope that you guys will join the Art Prof family and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And thank you so much to our top Patreon supporters who make everything possible. Thank you to all of you for your wonderful comments in the chat. Have a great night. We'll see you guys next time. Bye.